work underway in one of our working groups. David Jacques has been the author of 3 papers that have been sent around, and there's been a really useful discussion. So I'm just going to, David and I decided for here we wouldn't try to capture that discussion, but we would give it some context. So next slide, please. For purposes of looking backward, we begin with the committee, and we begin with the Florence Charter and the definition that's in that charter. A historic garden is an architectural and horticultural composition of interest to the public from the historical or artistic point of view. And as Elizabeth noted in the video, a monument for purposes of considering it as heritage. Next, please. The 1992 World Heritage UNESCO operational guidelines show us the definition, which we often jump over to the categories: cultural landscapes, cultural properties that represent the combined works of nature and man. We, of course, would not use man, we would use humanity. Designated in Article 1 of the Convention, they're illustrative of the evolution of human society and settlement over time under the influence of the physical constraints and or opportunities presented by their natural environment and of successive social, economic, and cultural forces, both internal and external. So this definition really indicates to us that there's this evolutionary milieu of multiple forces on the landscape. And the images here are the first inscribed cultural landscapes, Tongariro National Park, of cultural and religious significance to the Maori peoples. Next, please. So if we go further and look at the categories, we have the 3 main categories that we're familiar with from 1992. The reason this working group was fostered and is going forward is because these definitions are now nearly 30 years old. Coming up in a few months, they will be 30 years old. So those 3 main categories, the landscape designed and created intentionally, the organically evolved, the associative cultural landscape, really make a difference. Next, please. So another marker is the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape, which pulls us certainly out of the historic garden realm, and 2 examples here: Valparaiso in Chile and Ait Ben Aidu in Morocco. The historic urban landscape does not use in that document the words cultural landscape. It is an urban area understood as the result of historic layering of cultural and natural values and attributes extending beyond the notion of historic center or ensemble to include the broader urban context and its geographical setting. Next, please. In 2013, there's an IFLA policy that I fostered as chair of that Cultural Landscape Committee for IFLA on cultural landscapes and the landscape architecture profession, and it puts into a policy statement for an early reference. There are others, of course: cultural landscapes of all types, land and water, as well as all scales, history and meaning and their contexts are globally, nationally, regionally, and locally significant resources. So another doctrinal text coming from one of the founding organizations. Next, please, of our ISCCL. And 2020-2021, the working group has moved forward. I'll turn over to David on this frame.
Okay. Patricia has mentioned the papers we've circulated, and we have had some quite interesting feedback from them. And actually yesterday, so a lot of the discussion yesterday reflected what we've already heard. So it's quite certain that our present day concepts of cultural landscapes do differ in detail, in some cases quite considerably. from the ideas of 30 years ago. So here's one piece of feedback from Brazil. The landscape is not outside of the human, nor is it contained only in the human mental perception. Humans interact integrally with the system from its physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental instance, and are not separated from nature. Interactions give sense to tangible and intangible elements and processes. Okay, so next one, please. And a supporter of Maori traditions said, I do not agree with the contention that people are distinct from nature, which I think is from Western ideology. I mean, that's a particular view held by, I know, a lot of people.
You have 2 minutes, David, excuse me.
Next one, please. So another comment, it's critical to continue to examine and better understand this nature-culture interplay. I encourage further consideration of this aspect in crafting a landscape definition, given the increasing interest in interrelationships or entanglement of nature and culture from ICOMOS, IUCN, and ICROM within World Heritage, and for landscapes and waterscapes more broadly. Next one, please. And what we found is that, as Stephen Brown predicted, the term cultural landscape defies any neat description, as meanings and their nuances shift shape. Cultural landscape questions of identity, definitions, and terminology may legitimately vary across varied places, cultures, and continents. I think this is becoming increasingly clear. And I mean, some people have suggested that each continent defines cultural landscapes for themselves. Well, all these comments that have been coming in are being taken in and composed by our group. And our deliberations are far from complete, of course. Sorry? So hopefully in the next few months, we can put back to the group where we've got to, and some things that seem to be common to the group as a whole. So our work continues, and I would encourage those people on the group to respond, to give us more feedback, because unless we have it, we can't do our work. So hope to hear from all of you in the future. Bye.